All right, let's jump into this deep dive. We're taking a look at Essential English today,
Mm.
and figuring out, what it has to say about making communication clear, not really getting bogged down in like all the grammar rules, but kind of more the, ah, interesting, useful stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting. This book, it doesn't just focus on, like how to write a better email. It actually takes kind of a different approach.
Mhm.
It's saying that, clear language, it helps you to build trust,
Hmm.
which, is kind of like the bedrock of good communication.
Yeah, I really like that idea. It's like being concise. It's kind of a form of respect, for the reader's time.
Yeah.
Saying like, hey, I'm not going to waste your time with a bunch of fluff. Does Essential English give like specific examples of how that works?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things they talk about is active voice.
Mm.
Everybody always says active voice good, passive voice bad.
Mm.
But this book, they kind of take a different spin on it. They say it's not so much about like a hard and fast rule, but more about like the rhythm and the flow of your writing. They even go so far as to compare it to music. Like a well-written sentence, it should have this kind of natural beat to it, like a clear melody.
So it's not just about being grammatically correct. It's like creating a certain energy with your words.
Exactly. And they give some pretty cool examples of how active voice can be used to like really add emphasis or
Yeah.
even create a sense of urgency. They talk about how politicians, for instance, they often use passive voice to avoid taking responsibility.
Uh-huh.
Like they'll say, mistakes were made instead of, I made a mistake.
Hmm.
It's subtle, but it really makes a difference.
That's a great point. Yeah. Because it makes me think about all those ways that we use language to influence people, even when we're not really aware of it. Does Essential English talk about persuasive writing?
They do. They do. And they have really fascinating perspective on it. They argue that the best persuasive writing, it's actually built on clarity and honesty, winning over your reader with logic and evidence, but also with empathy and respect. They call it ethical persuasion.
I like that, ethical persuasion. So it's not about like manipulating the reader, it's about making a genuine connection through like honest and clear communication.
Exactly. Essential English argues that when you write clearly and concisely, you're basically showing your reader that you respect their time and intelligence. You're not trying to trick them or confuse them with complicated words. You're just being straightforward.
Right.
And that builds trust. And trust is essential for any kind of meaningful communication.
Right. It makes sense. It's like clear communication. It's kind of like the foundation for any healthy relationship, whether it's personal or professional. So we've talked about active voice and ethical persuasion. What else does Essential English offer?
So another thing they focus on is, respecting the reader's time.
Hmm.
But they go beyond, just saying use shorter sentences. They talk about really thinking about what your reader needs and presenting the information in a way that's easy for them to understand.
Right.
They even talk about things like formatting, using things like bullet points and headings to break up the text so it's easier to scan and absorb.
Right. So instead of thinking of your writing as this big block of text, you're creating like a roadmap for your reader.
Yeah. And they even use the analogy of a website. You know how a good website, it's designed to be user-friendly and easy to navigate?
Right.
They say your writing should be the same way.
I like that. That's a good analogy. Yeah. Because it's like we're so used to, like getting information online in these like, really short bursts. Do they say anything about writing for social media?
It's interesting. You would think they would have a whole chapter on social media, but they actually don't. They argue that the principles of clear communication they're kind of universal. Whether you're writing a tweet, a blog post, or even a book, it's always about respecting your audience, getting to the point, and making sure your message resonates.
So it's not really about the medium. It's more about the core principles of like clear and concise writing.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes this book so valuable. It's not just about teaching you specific techniques. It's about helping you develop a mindset, a communication mindset that you can apply to anything.
So it sounds like Essential English is more about helping you understand how language works
Hmm.
and how to use it effectively to achieve your goals.
Exactly. And they even talk about the importance of developing your own unique voice.
Okay, let's talk about voice. That's one of those things that, you hear people talk about,
Yeah.
but it's hard to define. Like, how do you find your voice? What do they say about that?
They have a very down-to-earth approach. They basically say that your voice, it kind of emerges naturally. As you write more and you become more comfortable with expressing yourself, they compare it to learning a musical instrument. The more you practice, the better you get.
Uh-huh. So it's not about trying to sound like someone else.
No, not at all. They actually encourage you to embrace your own quirks, the things that make your writing unique.
It's like, be yourself.
Exactly. And they even have some practical tips for finding your voice. Like they suggest reading your work aloud,
Yeah.
so you can actually hear how it sounds, or even just writing in a journal, without worrying about what anyone else thinks.
Okay, I like that. That journaling tip, I'm definitely going to try that. What about humor? Do they talk about using humor in your writing?
They do.
Yeah.
And they're very practical about it. They acknowledge that humor can be a really powerful tool,
Yeah.
especially for connecting with your reader. But they also caution against, using humor that could be offensive or inappropriate.
Right, so it's about knowing your audience, right?
Yeah. And they even talk about the importance of self-awareness, being able to laugh at yourself
Yeah.
and not taking things too seriously.
Right. If you can't laugh at yourself, who can you laugh at, right? But seriously, do they give any examples of like how to use humor effectively?
Oh, yeah. For example, they talk about using self-deprecating humor to make yourself more relatable, or using like witty observations to emphasize a point.
Right. So it's not about telling jokes, it's about finding ways to be witty and, to show your personality.
Exactly. They even argue that humor can be really helpful in difficult situations.
Right.
Like to disarm your critics or diffuse tension.
That's so true. Sometimes, a well-timed joke can totally change the mood of a conversation.
And that's what Essential English is all about. It's about using language as a tool to connect with people,
Yeah.
to build relationships,
Hmm.
and to make a positive impact.
I love that. Yeah. It's like they're not just teaching you how to write better, they're teaching you how to be a better communicator and how to, really connect with people.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to connect with people, they say, is through storytelling.
Okay, let's talk about storytelling. Why is it so important for good communication?
I mean, think about it. Stories have this amazing power to grab our attention. They make us feel things and they make complex ideas easier to understand.
Yeah, it's like when you're a kid and you're listening to a bedtime story. You're just completely lost in that world. But how do you translate that kind of magic into like, a business report or an email?
Well, Essential English argues that even in those contexts, you can still connect with your reader. On a human level, they suggest using things like anecdotes, personal experiences, or even just hypothetical scenarios to bring your points to life.
So instead of just presenting like dry facts and figures, you're telling a story.
Exactly. And they even talk about using sensory details,
Yeah,
so your reader can really imagine being there, experiencing it themselves.
that's cool. Like you're creating a little movie in the reader's mind using words.
Yeah, exactly. And they talk about metaphors and similes as ways to make abstract ideas more concrete.
Right. So instead of just saying our company is growing rapidly, you could say something like our company is growing like wildfire.
Exactly. That kind of imagery makes your writing much more engaging, and it helps your message to stick.
It makes me think about how we get caught up in all the technical stuff, the grammar rules, the punctuation, and forget about the power of just telling a good story.
It's so easy to do that. But Essential English really reminds us that at its core, good communication is about making a connection with your reader
Uh-huh.
and sharing your ideas in a way that is both clear and compelling.
And sometimes the best way to do that is through a story.
Absolutely. And Essential English gives you a framework for how to do that effectively. They also talk a lot about being aware of your audience.
Okay, let's talk about that. Audience awareness. It's one of those things that everyone agrees with, but it's easy to forget when you're writing.
Right. And they have this really practical approach to it. They say to think of your reader as a partner in the communication process, like someone whose time and attention you need to earn.
So it's not just about like getting your own message out there. It's about considering how it will be received.
Exactly. They actually suggest that you think about your reader's background. What do they already know? What are they interested in? And even things like their age and cultural background. Because all of that can influence how they understand your message.
Right. Right. And what about when you don't know your audience very well? Like when you're writing for like a large online audience.
Well, they talk about that too. And they say that even in those situations, you can still apply the principles of audience awareness,
Hmm.
by thinking about like what your readers have in common. What are their shared interests? What are their goals?
So it's like finding the common ground. So
Exactly.
you can connect with them on a deeper level.
Exactly. And they also talk about this idea of creating an audience persona, which is basically just like a mental image of your ideal reader
Okay.
help you stay focused.
So it's not just about like knowing your audience in general. It's about really like putting yourself in their shoes
Yeah.
and seeing the world from their perspective.
Yeah. And they argue that empathy is key, for building trust and rapport with your reader.
And trust is the foundation of any good relationship, right?
Absolutely. And that leads to another key point that they make about the importance of using clear and concrete language to create vivid images in the reader's mind.
Okay, tell me more about that. I'm always looking for ways to make my writing more engaging.
Well, think about how a vague description can kind of leave you feeling flat. But when you have a really specific, concrete description, it can make you feel like you're right there.
Right. Like the difference between saying the food was good and like the steak was juicy and cooked to perfection.
Exactly. And that's the power of using concrete language. It engages the reader's senses.
So how do you use concrete language effectively? Do they give any tips for that?
Oh, yeah, tons. They say
Yeah.
to use specific details, words that appeal to the senses and strong verbs.
Okay.
So instead of saying, the dog was happy, you might say, the golden retriever wagged its tail excitedly and barked with joy.
Yeah, that's much more vivid. I can practically see that dog.
And they also talk about using strong verbs to give your writing energy.
So it's not just about choosing the right words, it's about arranging them in a way that, that creates a sense of movement.
Exactly. And they even suggest using literary devices like metaphors and similes to add a little flair to your writing.
Okay, I love a good metaphor, or simile.
Me too. And they talk about using them to connect abstract ideas to something more concrete.
Right.
Like instead of saying, our team is facing a challenge, you could say, our team is climbing a mountain, but we're determined to reach the summit.
Oh, I like that. Much more powerful than just saying, we're facing a challenge.
Yeah, and it's memorable. So that's the key, using concrete language and literary devices to make your writing more engaging and memorable.
It's like you're tapping into the reader's imagination.
Exactly. And speaking of imagination, one thing that Essential English emphasizes is that sometimes the simplest language is the most effective.
Uh-huh. So it's not about trying to sound smart or using a lot of big words.
No, not at all. They actually encourage you to avoid using jargon or overly technical terms that your reader might not understand.
So it's not about dumbing down your writing. It's about making it sharper and more accessible.
Precisely. They compare clear writing to a well-designed product, something that's both functional and aesthetically pleasing.
Right. So good writing should be both easy to understand and enjoyable to read.
Exactly. And they offer a bunch of practical tips for achieving that, like using active voice, strong verbs, concrete details. And they even suggest reading your work out loud to hear how it sounds, and getting feedback from other people.
That's so important, getting feedback from others, because, sometimes you can be so close to your own writing that you miss things.
Absolutely. And they stress that good communication, it's a process. It's something you're always working on.
I like that. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about active voice, ethical persuasion, audience awareness, storytelling, concrete language. But I want to touch on one more thing, and that's conciseness. It seems like everyone agrees that it's important, but not everyone knows how to actually do it. How does Essential English approach conciseness?
Well, they had this really interesting take on it. They say that it's not just about using fewer words. It's about making every word count.
Okay.
They use this analogy of a sculptor, who chips away at a block of stone to reveal the form within.
I like that. Yeah, like you're not just trying to write less, you're trying to write better.
Exactly. They say you need to be ruthless in your editing. Get rid of anything that's not absolutely essential.
And that can be hard.
It can be. They give a lot of good tips, though, like using strong verbs, avoiding passive voice, and getting rid of redundant words and phrases.
So it's about really being mindful of your reader's time.
Exactly. And attention. People are busy. You don't want to make them wade through a bunch of unnecessary words to get to your point.
Right. Especially in today's world where everyone's so bombarded with information. If you want your writing to be read, it has to be clear, concise, and to the point.
Exactly. And Essential English gives you the tools to do that. They also spend a lot of time talking about the importance of punctuation.
Okay, punctuation. That's something I could definitely use some help with.
Well, think of it this way. Punctuation, it's kind of like the unsung hero of writing. It gives your words rhythm and flow, and it can really help to prevent misunderstandings.
It's like the traffic signals of writing,
Right.
telling the reader when to pause, when to stop, and when to keep going.
Exactly. Essential English actually gives a really good overview of the different types of punctuation. and how to use them properly.
That's like having a cheat sheet for all those commas and semicolons and
Yeah,
dashes.
exactly. And once you've mastered the basics, they even talk about how to use punctuation more creatively, to create a certain mood or tone, just like an actor might use pauses and inflections in their voice.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's not just about following the rules, it's about using punctuation to enhance your message.
Exactly. They even talk about how punctuation can be used to create rhythm and flow.
That's amazing.
Uh,
I'm starting to see punctuation in a whole new light.
Good. It's not just a bunch of arbitrary rules. It's a tool, a
Hmm.
powerful tool that can really elevate your writing.
I can't wait to learn more.
Me too.
Yeah.
Essential English has so much to offer. It's funny, a lot of times people think that good writing has to be really complicated
Yeah.
and full of, big words and long sentences.
Right.
But Essential English, they actually make a really strong case for keeping things simple.
Okay.
They say that the best writing is usually the most straightforward, using language that anyone can understand.
So it's like cutting through all the clutter and just getting right to the point.
Exactly. They even have this great analogy
Yeah.
where they compare clear writing to a clear window.
Oh.
You can see right through it. There's no distortion or anything.
I like that.
And that's what you want your writing to be like a transparent window into your thoughts.
It's like you're inviting the reader in
Exactly.
instead of trying to, show off how smart you are. But how do you achieve that kind of clarity without oversimplifying things?
Well, one thing they emphasize is being specific.
Okay.
So instead of using vague generalizations, you want to use concrete details and examples, and even data to support your claims.
Right. So it's like instead of just saying our product is the best, you'd give specific reasons why.
Exactly. Like, what are the features that make it so great? What are the benefits?
Right.
Do you have testimonials from satisfied customers? And they even talk about quantifying your claims,
Okay.
using numbers and statistics to back up what you're saying.
Because numbers don't lie, right?
Exactly. And you can even use visuals like charts and graphs
Hmm.
to make complex information more accessible.
Ooh, I love a good chart or graph. Yeah. Because sometimes it's easier to understand information when it's presented visually.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even when you're not dealing with hard numbers, yeah, you can still be specific
Mm,
by using examples.
right.
Essential English argues that giving concrete examples can help people to understand even abstract concepts.
Okay.
They even suggest using analogies and metaphors to connect the unfamiliar with something that's already familiar.
So you're building a bridge between what your reader already knows and what you're trying to teach them.
Exactly. Like, if you were trying to explain the concept of bandwidth,
Okay.
you could compare it to a highway.
Mm.
The wider the highway, the more traffic it can handle.
It's good. Yeah, I get that.
And even when you're writing for experts,
Okay.
people who are already familiar with the topic, it's still important to be clear and concise, avoiding jargon
Mm.
or overly technical terms.
Right. So you're always kind of erring on the side of clarity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you never know what someone might not understand.
Right, right. It's like I work in this field, so I know all this stuff, but someone outside my field, they might not.
Exactly. And Essential English, they emphasize that clear communication, it's all about building bridges,
Hmm.
not walls.
I like that.
It's about making your ideas understandable to as many people as possible.
Okay. But sometimes, even when you're writing clearly, you can still end up with these really long, complicated sentences. Does Essential English talk about that?
They do. They have a whole section on sentence structure
Hmm.
where they talk about the importance of, using strong verbs, active voice, and varying your sentence length
Okay.
to keep your writing interesting.
Right. So it's not about like only writing short sentences.
No, it's about finding a balance, mixing things up so you don't lose your reader's attention.
Right, right. And do they talk about anything else in that section on sentence structure?
Yeah, they also talk about parallel structure,
Yeah.
which is basically just using the same grammatical structure to express two or more related ideas.
Right.
It creates this nice sense of balance and rhythm.
Okay.
Like instead of saying she loved singing, dancing, and acting, you could say she loved to sing, to dance, and to act.
Yeah. I see the difference. It's subtle, but yeah. That second one is much better.
And then they also talk about using punctuation strategically,
Okay.
to create pauses and emphasis.
So it's like using punctuation as a tool to kind of shape the way the reader experiences your writing.
Exactly. And they also talk about, things like breaking up big chunks of text with headings and bullet points.
Right.
So it's easier to read.
Because our brains are kind of programmed to skim these days,
Yes.
right? So you got to make it easy for people to, to find the information they're looking for.
Exactly. And Essential English gives you all sorts of tools for doing that. But they don't stop there. They also talk about the importance of understanding your own writing process.
Okay, let's talk about that. Writing process is something that every writer, struggles with at some point.
Right.
What kind of insights does the book offer?
Well, they have this really refreshing approach. They basically say that, there's no right or wrong way to write.
Okay.
What works for one person might not work for another. So they encourage you to experiment
Right.
and find what feels most natural for you.
So there's no magic formula.
No, not at all. And they also talk about the importance of being kind to yourself.
Okay.
Don't get too hung up on perfection. They say the most important thing is just to get your ideas down on paper
Right.
and then worry about revising later.
That's good advice. Because I tend to get stuck in the editing phase.
A lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
But they remind us that writing is a process. It's okay to make mistakes.
Right.
The most important thing is to just keep writing, keep learning.
So it's about the journey, not the destination.
Exactly.
I like that. Do they have any advice for people who are dealing with writer's block?
Yeah, they have a whole chapter on that. They offer all sorts of strategies like, free writing.
Yeah.
Or brainstorming.
Mhm.
Or just taking a break and doing something else to clear your head.
So it's not the end of the world if you're feeling stuck.
No, not at all.
There are ways to get unstuck. What about outlining? Do they talk about outlining?
Yes. They talk about the importance of creating a clear structure for your writing.
Okay.
And they suggest different outlining techniques depending on, what you're writing.
So there's no one right way to do it.
No. It's about finding what works for you.
Yeah.
And they also say that it's important to be flexible.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to deviate from your outline
Right.
if you need to. They say that your outline should be a guide,
Huh?
not a straitjacket.
I like that. It should be a roadmap, not a prison.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. They really seem to cover all the bases in this book. What about transitions? Do they talk about the importance of transitions?
Oh, absolutely. They say that transitions are like the glue that holds your writing together.
Okay.
They help to guide your reader smoothly from one idea to the next. And they have a whole section on different types of transitions.
So you're not just like jumping from one thought to another, you're using transitions to kind of connect everything.
Exactly. They compare transitions to bridges,
Okay.
connecting different parts of your writing.
Yeah, like you're building a bridge between each paragraph.
Exactly. And they also suggest using a variety of transitions,
Right.
so you don't sound too repetitive.
Okay, that's a good tip. Because I tend to overuse certain transitions.
A lot of people do.
Like, however, or therefore.
Yeah, those are classic ones,
Mm-hmm.
but there's so many others out there.
So it's about being creative and finding new ways to connect your ideas.
Exactly. And they even suggest using punctuation to create pauses and transitions within sentences.
So again, it's about using punctuation strategically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't forget about breaking up long blocks of text
Right.
with headings, subheadings, bullet points.
To make it more visually appealing.
Exactly. Remember, people skim. You want to make your writing easy to scan. And Essential English is full of great advice for how to do that.
Yeah. This is all really helpful. I feel like I'm learning so much.
Good. That's
Yeah.
what we like to hear. And there's still more to come. It really feels like this book is giving us permission to, loosen up a little, to not be so afraid to break the rules
Right.
and write in a more natural conversational style.
Right. It's like sometimes we try so hard to sound professional or academic that we end up sounding stiff and impersonal.
Exactly. And they actually argue that that can be really counterproductive.
Yeah.
It's better to be yourself and let your personality come through in your writing.
Right. So it's about finding that balance between being clear and concise, but also, being engaging and showing your personality.
Exactly. They say that good writing should feel effortless, like you're just having a conversation with your reader.
Right. But, achieving that effortless flow, it takes work.
Oh, absolutely. And Essential English, they dedicate a whole section to the importance of editing and revising.
Right.
They stress that it's not just about fixing typos and grammatical errors. It's about really taking the time to refine your message, make sure your ideas are clear, and make sure your writing, it really sings.
So it's like you've got the raw material, And then you
Yeah,
have to go back and polish it.
exactly.
Yeah.
And they even compare it to sculpting.
Okay.
You chip away at the excess until you reveal the true form underneath.
Okay. I like that. Does Essential English give any specific advice for how to edit effectively?
Oh yeah, lots. One of their biggest recommendations is reading your work aloud.
Okay.
They say that when you hear your writing, it's easier to catch things that sound awkward or
Hmm.
repetitive or sentences that are just, too long and clunky.
Yeah. Because sometimes I'll read something out loud and it sounds totally different than it did in my head.
It happens to all of us.
Yeah.
And they also suggest having someone else read your work,
Okay.
preferably someone who will give you honest feedback.
Right. Because you need that outside perspective.
You do. And they emphasize that, it's not about taking things personally.
Right.
It's about making sure that your message is coming across clearly to the reader.
So Essential English is saying that clear communication isn't just about writing well, it's about editing well.
Exactly. And they have all these practical tips, like setting aside time for revision,
Right.
focusing on one element at a time, like clarity, conciseness, flow. They really break it down.
It's making me realize that I need to make more time for editing. You know?
Yeah.
It's so easy to just kind of rush through it.
I know, it's tempting. But it's worth taking the time
Right.
to really make your writing shine.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. I feel like I'm finally starting to understand the nuances of clear communication.
That's great to hear. And what's even more exciting is that these principles can be applied to all kinds of communication, not just writing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like if you're giving a presentation or leading a meeting or even just, having a conversation with a friend, the ideas in Essential English can help you to connect with people on a deeper level.
So it's not just about becoming a better writer.
No, it's about becoming a better communicator overall.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this deep dive with me. It's been really enlightening.
My pleasure. And to our listeners, take these principles and see how they can work for you, not just in your writing, but in every aspect of your life.
Great advice. Thanks for listening, everyone.